for this session this afternoon. I think this is our last session before closing notes.
Yes, it's the last one.
My name's Fran Batesby and I'm the Honorary Treasurer for CILIP Scotland. And I will be chairing today, but as you can see, the two presenters are not with me, but they will be joining us on Zoom afterwards, so you can ask them questions then. So this final session is on walking groups in Scottish public libraries. We have a pre-recorded presentation from Inga Allan and Perla Innocenti. Inga returned to studying in 2020 following a career in physiotherapy and completed a master's degree in information and library studies at the University of Strathclyde. She now works within NHS Lanarkshire, not Lancashire, wrong country, as a knowledge services officer, allowing her to combine her experience and interest in health with an information role. Perla is a digital heritage scholar and senior lecturer in information science at the University of Strathclyde. She is also an experienced researcher and publisher on digital heritage preservation and access. And she loves libraries and walking. She's currently investigating information practices, traditions, and wellness on walking routes. So we're going to play the presentation and then Inga and Perla will both join us on Zoom for questions afterwards.
Okay.
Welcome everyone, and a huge thank you for coming along to this session today. So, walking groups and public libraries. They're not necessarily the most obvious of combinations, but that's what I chose to look into for my master's dissertation that I carried out last summer. I'm going to today give you a brief overview of my project, and I'll talk to you about it in 4 separate parts. I'll give you a little bit of information about the background to my project and the relevant literature. I'll tell you about what I did, what I found, and some conclusions and recommendations at the end. I'll aim to talk for about 25 minutes and there'll be time for questions at the end. I am Inga Allan, and on screen here you can see Perla Innocenti. Perla is an academic at the University of Strathclyde. She loves libraries and walking, making her the ideal supervisor for my project. You can read a little bit more about her on the screen here. So in terms of why I chose to explore public library walking groups for my project, well, I read the Health on the Shelf report, which, if you're not familiar with, is a piece of research that was done exploring the activities that are going on within Scottish public libraries that support health and well-being. And what was found is that there's a huge range of different activities going on, and there's lots of examples given within the report. One of the examples is the walk-on, walking, talking and reading groups that operate in Fife, which had started as a funded project and then had gone on to operate in more libraries in the region because of the success of it. Now, I was previously a physiotherapist, so I'm very aware of the importance of staying active and mobile, particularly as you get older. And I also spent time working within a charity for older people, which was a real eye-opener in terms of the issue of social isolation and loneliness. So I could see how walking groups might be of benefit to these issues, but what I wasn't clear on was where the public library fitted into it. So I decided to explore that further for my project. So I initially started by having a look at some of the key literature around the topic. And what I found was literature around these 4 key areas. And I'll go on to talk just a little bit about each of these. So firstly, health and wellbeing at the public library. There are researchers who highlight the value of the public library in being inclusive and attracting people of all ages, backgrounds and cultures to use them. So for that reason, it's thought that they could be in an ideal position to engage people who are perhaps more vulnerable and less likely to engage with health and social care services. I found some literature around physical activity programmes in public libraries. One researcher, Noel Lenstra, has looked into this and he published one paper in 2019 with Carlos where they explored walking activities within public libraries in North America, and they found a range of activities being supported. I didn't manage, however, to find any literature about walking groups related to public libraries in the UK. I found a considerable amount of research into walking groups. There's research showing the health benefit of walking groups, both physical and mental health, as well as the social value of groups. But it has been pointed out that not everyone who might benefit from taking part in groups is accessing them, and at times it's perhaps more advantaged populations that are making use of groups. So inclusivity is a point that needs to be considered. In terms of promoting walking in Scotland, the Scottish Government have the National Walking Strategy to try to increase levels of activity and provide suitable environments to walk in. And Paths for All are a charity who support and promote walking in Scotland, and they have the ambitious goal of Get Scotland Walking, everyone, every day, everywhere. And finally, partnerships was the other key theme that came up in the literature, both related to public library activities and related to walking groups. And it's thought that there's real benefits of partners. And a collective force for health and wellbeing very much highlights the partnership approach between public libraries, health, social care services and the third sector as well. So that's a brief snapshot of the literature that I found that was relevant to my project, and that literature then directed what I decided to go on to look at and what I decided to go on to do. So these are two of the research questions that I chose to look into. The first one is about the benefits, exploring the benefits of adult walking groups provided by Scottish Public Libraries. And the second one is looking into challenges and opportunities related to providing this service. I also had a third research question exploring the coverage of public library walking groups within Scotland, but because of limited time today, I've chosen to focus on these two questions that you can see here. So now taking a look at what I did within my study. As you can see in the table here, I collected data in 3 different ways: an online questionnaire, online interviews and freedom of information requests. Again, because of limited time today, I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail about my methodology, but I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards if you would like some more information. It was an exploratory study, so I used a qualitative approach, which basically means I looked at opinions, perceptions, experiences, rather than hard and fast numbers. And by using the 3 different methods of collecting data, it was a way of giving me a much more comprehensive look at the topic. So the questionnaire asked questions about the experiences and opinions of public library staff and volunteers, and it asked different questions depending on whether people had experience of walking groups or not. At the end of the questionnaire, people were asked if they'd like to take part in an interview, so I interviewed 8 people on either Zoom or Microsoft Teams because of COVID restrictions at the time. And then the final method of collecting data was freedom of information requests. I sent 32 FOI requests to the local authorities in Scotland, and I asked for information on the number of public libraries providing walking groups in the region and any evaluation data. Now, I'd just like to say at this point a huge thank you if you were one of the people who participated in the study. I wouldn't have got the results I did and be here if I didn't have as many people taking part, so big thank you. I'd also like to point out that this was a study like any other in that it had limitations. COVID-19 potentially restricted the number of people that were at work and able to take part in the study. And I'm also aware that just because of the nature of a questionnaire, I am much more likely to have engaged people who have an interest in the topic compared to people who don't. And because it's a qualitative study, the results can't be generalised, but they could be transferable. And this slide here just shows a little bit more information about the people that I interviewed. And really all that I want to point out here was that I managed to interview people from a range of different job roles. 4 people had walking group experience, 4 didn't. Although of those who didn't, 1 was in the process of setting up a group and 1 was researching into a group. And these 8 people were all from different regions across Scotland, so I was able to get a good range of different opinions and experiences. Now moving on to have a look at the responses from the questionnaires. So I got 106 complete responses that I could analyse, and those responses were from 28 out of the 32 Scottish local authority regions, so there were only 4 regions where I got no responses. Obviously 106 is a small percentage of Scottish public library staff and volunteers, but I got coverage from a wide area across Scotland, which was a real positive in getting a range of different experiences and opinions. Of those 106, 25 people worked in a library that had a walking group, and 81 worked in a library that didn't have a walking group. When those 81 people were asked if they would be interested in providing a walking group service, you can see on the chart here that 57% of them said that yes, they would be interested. 36% weren't sure, and only 7% said no, they wouldn't be interested. So from this sample group, there's considerable interest in a walking group service. The people who had experience of walking groups who responded to the questionnaire were asked a range of different questions, and I've just picked out 2 of the key questions here to highlight. So they were asked to rate some statements in terms of how much they agreed with them. They were asked to rate how much they agreed with the statement library walking groups provide benefits to participants. And as you can see on the chart on the left hand side, 24 out of 25 strongly agreed that they provide benefits. And then the chart on the right shows the response to the statement library walking groups provide benefits to the library. And again, you can see that the vast majority strongly agree that they provide benefits to the library. I just want to point out that the one person who said strongly disagree actually gave very positive responses throughout other areas of the questionnaire, which does suggest that they may have misread the response categories. With the data that I got from the open questions in the questionnaire and the data that I got from the interviews, I carried out thematic analysis. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically just looking at the data and picking out key themes that emerge. So from the questionnaire, 5 key themes emerged, and from the interviews, 5 key themes emerged. And what you can hopefully see from the table here is that the first 4 themes in the questionnaires and the interviews are virtually the same. The interviews just allowed a bit of a further development of the themes. And the questionnaires also picked out one specific extra theme, and the interviews likewise picked out one specific extra theme. So for the purposes of the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to look at the sort of combined results from the questionnaire and the interviews. So I'll look at these in terms of 6 key themes, and I'll go on to talk a bit about each of these. So firstly, supporting health and well-being was something that was mentioned over and over again as a benefit that people perceived resulted from walking groups. This is a nice representative quote about some of the benefits that were mentioned. And this highlights the potential for physical, mental and social benefits as a result of taking part. And interestingly as well, this quote also highlights the potential benefit for staff of taking part in walking groups because they're connecting with the outdoors. Most of the people who responded to the questionnaire who had experience of walking groups said that their groups engaged with literature as well at some point as a part of the groups. And all of these people considered them important to some degree. Another aspect that came out quite clearly from both the questionnaires and the interviews is the potential for library walking groups to attract new users to the library. And the quote here just illustrates the potential for people who are coming to the groups to see what other things are going on in the library and to potentially borrow books, put issue figures up and so on. The importance of partnerships was another key theme. From the questionnaires, the majority of people who had experience of walking groups either had in the past or still had involvement with partners. And they mentioned a range of different partners, from external organisations to council departments and volunteers. And also there was mention of partnerships working in different ways depending on the sort of individual situation. And the quotes here just show some examples of how partnerships could work in terms of partners potentially given the walking expertise and the library offering the space and any other aspects. This slide shows the combined responses from all of the questionnaires and the interviews related to the theme of practical concerns or considerations. And this is from the perspective of both people who have walking group experience and those who don't. Some things like resource issues, in particular concerns over staffing, were mentioned by both people who had a walking group and those who didn't, as were things like concerns over poor weather and how do you market groups. But then other things like health and safety, how to manage different walking abilities and how to manage people's personal details, they were highlighted as being a concern by people who didn't have walking groups. What was interesting though was that there were comments from people who had experience of groups saying that they would be quite happy to share their experience and give advice to people out there who were keen to start a new group. So it does suggest that there might be support out there to address some of these concerns that have been highlighted. One point that was highlighted by one interviewee that I thought was important to mention here was about evaluation. And it's about how do you actually evaluate groups. We all know it's so important to be able to demonstrate the value of services, but is it just about counting the number of people that attend? Or actually, how do you measure the value that it's had to an individual person, how they felt, how it's benefited them in the short term and in the long term? So it's quite an interesting consideration to have. quite a few people who responded to the questionnaire highlighted the ethos of the public library at being very much at the heart of the community as being an advantage to supporting walking groups. And the top quote here just mentions the central location and the familiarity as being potentially an important way of getting people to try new things. I do have to point out though that there were some comments questioning why public libraries should be involved in walking groups. And the second quote here just illustrates that staff might be happy for groups to use the library, but they might not necessarily want to be involved in setting up and running groups. And the final theme that came out of the interviews was about existing in future groups. And it was interesting just to get a bit more detail about the types of people attending the groups. This quote I felt was an interesting and important one to highlight. It came from a volunteer who leads the group. And this person was just saying that potentially not everybody who could benefit is actually benefiting from groups. And essentially this person is addressing the potential benefit of social prescribing into groups in order to get that wider impact. So just to go on to talk about my conclusions and recommendations. So going back to my first research question exploring the benefits of adult walking groups provided by public libraries, it appears from the results of this study that there's the perception that groups provide benefits to participants and benefits to the library, as we've already discussed. And what I've found is that, like any other service, there will be challenges and opportunities to setting up and running a group. In terms of staff, this study has picked up that some staff are uncertain about the idea of a public library walking group, and I'm sure there will be many more out there who didn't respond to the questionnaire who will feel the same way. But what I've found in this study is that there are some staff who are really interested in the service, and possibly even more so as a result of the pandemic and the sort of increased focus on health and well-being that has provoked. Another challenge is how to get information to help you if you're thinking of starting a group. It might be a case of where do you actually start. But this study's found that there's a willingness from people who have experience of groups to actually share their experience and knowledge. And it maybe just needs a way of networking and sharing information between public library staff that's widely known about. Again, from this study, it looks like there are many different ways that groups can work in terms of the partners that are used and the roles that these partners play. So if you're thinking of starting a group, it could be difficult to know what partner to approach and know exactly what role the partner would adopt. But it's clear though that partners could play a huge role and potentially limit the amount of work that the library needs to do, especially if resource restrictions are an issue. And there's also a huge focus on improving health and well-being at the present time, and the role that the libraries can play in this, which might make attracting partnerships easier. It does seem though that it may be a challenge engaging people into groups that would really benefit from attending them. But the value of the library in being a central, familiar, trusted place might really help with this. And finally, it was pointed out in this study that there might already be walking groups within the area of the library. So is there any need for more? But could this actually be a potential opportunity to partner with a ready-made group so that both parties could gain benefits? So these were the main challenges and opportunities that were highlighted within this study. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but these were some of the key points that emerged. So going back to my original thought, where do public libraries and walking groups fit together. In the words of one of the participants of my study, walking outdoors is calming and reading books is escaping. So I believe what this study has shown is that in the right circumstances, walking groups and public libraries could potentially be a very good match. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I hope I've just given you a little bit of food for thought about something that you might not have considered before. I'd like to say a huge thank you for listening today, and please feel free to ask any questions if you want to find out any more information, or equally if you've got any comments or experience yourself in walking group provision. It would be really interesting and useful to hear that. I'd be more than happy to send out references if anybody would like them, and I'd also just like to mention that we're in the process of submitting an article based on my project as a way of disseminating the research further. So thank you.
Check that we can hear you.
Hi, Sean.
Oh, good, yes.
Oh, hi everybody.
Which mic should I use?
Oh, you can maybe use that one if you want. 2 seconds.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So thank you so much for the presentation. It all worked seamlessly over here. Do we have any questions from our audience?
Can the participants hear me? Can the
Yes, they can.
the
Yep.
room Kim?
Yep, they can.
Hello, hi everybody. So sorry we cannot be there with you. There were a few obstacles, unfortunately for today. But if you don't mind, can I please ask you to make some applause for Inga, because this is her very first presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really appreciated. And I can also say that I'm super proud of her. She was, she was an outstanding student, the best student from our cohort last year. And she really did a fantastic job in her master project. And we both hope that you found it interesting and also relevant for your own work, your own practice. So we are very open to questions or comments or suggestions, both now here today and also later on if you want to send us an email.
Thank you. So are there any questions from the room? Inga, did you want to say something?
I just want to give my huge apologies for not being there in person. It had been very much my intention to present in person, but COVID had other ideas, so hence the reason I'm stuck at home. So yeah. The recording wasn't meant to really ever be used, but thankfully it was there as a backup, so you don't have to listen to my croaky voice over Zoom.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. Really, really enjoyed it, and it really tied in with some of the other presentations that we've had about well-being and the connection between the libraries and well-being in general, but with some more specific examples too. So who knows, maybe in a few years' time there'll be many more walking groups associated with the library taking place. But if we could just give another round of applause, please, for Inga for her presentation. Thank you. Oh, we did have a question. Tony.
Hello. I don't know if Inga can hear me. Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really nice to see. I just want to ask, because you did mention about disability inclusion, and that was like a part of your study that people had kind of highlighted. I was wondering if people kind of had any, whether you found that the people you interviewed maybe had any thoughts on how that could work in a walking group and what kind of steps could be taken to make it a disability inclusive group, or if you had any thoughts yourself, maybe.
Inga, did you hear that well? Yes.
About disability inclusion.
Yeah.
It wasn't an area that I specifically looked into. And I think from the people that I interviewed, it was quite interesting because it appeared that a lot of the people that they attracted tended to be more active, able-bodied people. So I think the issue of disability inclusion is probably a very important one to highlight. I know that Paths for All, the organisation who really promote and support walking, they have health walks, and their health walks very much look at inclusivity of their walks, and that they are very much able to support and advise anyone who's looking to set up a group. But yeah, it wasn't an area that I specifically looked into in any depth in my project.
That's a great question, and I think it would be wonderful to explore this particular sector further. So in a follow-up study, there is definitely, I mean, from this research, there is definitely a strong interest demonstrated by Scottish public libraries in fostering, supporting walking groups in partnerships with other associations. So my sense is that there is an opportunity to widen the scope of this service, and also possibly design tailor-specific walking groups for non-able participants, non-able readers. Yeah. Do you have a walking group in your library? So if you are a librarian working in a library.
Does anyone have a walking group in their library? Oh, there's a few hands up. A few hands
Yes.
up in their libraries. It's nice to see some people represented here that have some walking groups in theirs. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the presentation again, Inga. And maybe we'll see you at a CILIPS conference next time when you're able to come in person. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again, and we hope you had a fantastic conference. So we've been following you. We've been following you online, and we're looking forward to meeting you again on site, in person, or online for the next opportunity. So thanks again for having us via Zoom.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.